Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Clancy. Good to see you today. We are going to read a story called Thomas's Snowsuit. Now, we're reading this story because there's a chance that you might be home because it is snowing outside. And I don't know about you, but it is really hard to pay attention and do anything else when it is snowing outside my window. So some of you have some schoolwork that you still have to get done today. Go ahead and do that, and then you can go out and play if it is a snowy day outside. One thing I think about, though, when I think about getting ready to go out in the snow is I think about all the stuff I have to put on to go outside. I've got to put my socks on and my boots and my gloves and my hat and make sure my ears are covered up. And then I have to put on that big giant snowsuit. And our character in our story today, his name is Thomas, and he is not excited about having to wear a snowsuit. If you feel the same way as Thomas sometimes, will you show me that connection signal? Yeah, sometimes we just can't wait to take it off once we come inside from being out in the snow. So we're going to read this story. I have the book right here with me, but I'm going to turn the pictures for you so that you can see them a little bit bigger on the screen. And I'm not sure if you brought any reading buddies with you today, but I have a few friends that are sitting next to me and they are listening to the story. So they're going to be great listeners. If you want to grab a reading buddy to read with you today, go ahead and grab one and then come back and we'll read the story. So let's read what happens to Thomas. I'm going to give you a little hint. This story is really silly. So you're going to hear some silly parts in this story. Is it okay to laugh sometimes at books? Yeah, so you can laugh along with me because it is kind of silly. One day, Thomas's mother bought him a nice new brown snowsuit. When Thomas saw that snowsuit, he said, "This is the ugliest thing I have ever seen in my life. If you think I'm going to wear that ugly snowsuit, you're crazy." Now, it's okay to say that something is ugly sometime, like maybe if we don't like a shirt or an outfit, but it's not a kind word to use towards other people. So he's talking about his snowsuit. Thomas's mother said, "Well, we will see about that." The next day, when it was time to go to school, the mother said, "Thomas, please put on your snowsuit." And Thomas said, "No." His mother jumped up and down and said, "Thomas, put on that snowsuit." And Thomas said, "No." So Thomas's mother picked up Thomas in one hand and she picked up the snowsuit in the other hand and she tried to stick them together. They had an enormous fight, and when it was done, Thomas was in his snowsuit. Look at what happened in their house. They must have been wrestling and jumping over top of each other just to get that snowsuit on him. How silly. Thomas went off to school and hung up his snowsuit. When it was time to go outside, all the other kids jumped into their snowsuits and ran out the door. But not Thomas. The teacher looked at Thomas and said, "Thomas, please put on your snowsuit." Remember what Thomas said? "No," he said. The teacher jumped up and down and said, "Thomas, put on that snowsuit." And Thomas said, "No." So the teacher picked up Thomas in one hand, picked up the snowsuit in the other hand, and she tried to stick them together. They had an enormous fight, and when they were done, the teacher was wearing Thomas's snowsuit, and Thomas was wearing the teacher's dress. Oh my goodness, look at them. I don't think that snowsuit fits her very well. And that dress certainly doesn't fit him, does it? When the teacher saw what she was wearing, she picked up Thomas in one hand and tried to get him back into his snowsuit. They had an enormous fight. When they were done, the snowsuit and the dress were tied into a great big knot on the floor, and Thomas and the teacher were in their underclothes. Just then, the door opened and in walked the principal. The teacher said, "It's Thomas. He won't put on his snowsuit." Look how silly they are. The principal doesn't look very happy, does he? The principal gave his very best principal look and said, "Thomas, put on your snowsuit." And what do you think Thomas said? "No." So the principal picked up Thomas in one hand, and then he picked up the teacher in the other hand, and he tried to get them back into their clothes. When he was done, the principal was wearing the teacher's dress, and the teacher was wearing the principal's suit. And Thomas was still in his underwear. Then from far out in the playground, someone yelled, "Thomas, come and play!" Thomas ran across the room, jumped into his snowsuit, got his boots on in 2 seconds, and ran out the door. The principal looked at the teacher and said, "Hey, you have on my suit. Take it off right now." The teacher said, "Oh no, you have on my dress. You take off my dress first." Well, they argued and argued and argued and argued, but neither one wanted to change first. Finally, Thomas came in from recess. He looked at the principal and he looked at the teacher. Thomas picked up the principal in one hand. He picked up the teacher in the other hand. They had an enormous fight, and Thomas got everybody back into their clothes. The next day, the principal quit his job and moved to Arizona, where nobody ever wears a snowsuit. The end. What a goofy and silly story, right? I like to laugh at books sometimes because it's just fun to smile and read silly things, right? And this was definitely a silly story. But it really does remind me about how sometimes I just don't want to do certain things that maybe my mom or my dad or my teacher or principal tells me to do. But why do you think it's important to wear that snowsuit? Do you know? Right. So we're not cold outside and freezing in the snow, because it is really cold out there when we play in the snow, especially when we want to play for a long time. What's something that you like to do when you go out in the snow? Do you get all bundled up? Does anybody come outside and play with you? Well, tell one of your reading buddies if you brought a reading buddy with you, or if you have a grown-up listening with you or a brother or sister nearby, you can tell them something that you like to do in the snow and how you feel about wearing a snowsuit. Wonder if we could find a snowsuit for these guys. What do you think? Think we could find one small enough for them? I don't know. Well, whatever you do today, if you get to go out and play in the snow, have fun being a kid. And don't forget to finish up some of your work and bring it back to school when you come back to see me. I miss you. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.